Good evening and welcome to my first live stream. I'm Lillian and my channel is Princess Lillian's Gardens. In my live stream, I would like to discuss with you ways forward, the possibilities that we have being alive in this current time, the luck that we have, the gains that we can make by taking action. Thank you very much. I can see you there. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Today, I'll be talking about a few things that we can look at and realize that although there are silver, although there are dark clouds looming all over the world, but there's silver all over these dark clouds. There's opportunities that we can seize, and there is things that we can do. Although we are all home in this lockdown, it's given us a bit of a chance to be with family more than before. I think this is one positive thing that has come out of this situation. We must look for a way to beat it, a way to overcome it, because we are supposed to be overcomers. We are supposed to be in control of this earth. Look at different situations. A plant can only remain there if we allow it. Animals we can drive away if we choose to. But as men and women, we have found ourselves fortunate to be able to make these decisions, whether we want the situation to be this way or we don't want. We have what is called the opposable terms. So we get to be able to change things, unlike the other organisms that occupy this planet with us. A lion may be very ferocious, but a lion can still be caged. An elephant is very big. An elephant can still be caged. Giraffes, bulls, they can all be caged by human beings. This shows us that we are in control. And it's not only these large organisms alone, the very little ones that we can see, that we cannot see with our eyes. We need a microscope to see them. The microorganisms. We can control their spread. That means we are able to control where they could be a lot of the times. And if we are finding this difficult, then we need to have a rethink about what to do. The life has been on this planet for a long, long time. And all these things that we're experiencing nowadays, I've seen several pictures and I see that it seems everything is just going around in a cycle. So I want to give you this message of hope that this too will soon be over. There are possibilities for us. This is actually the very best time to be alive for each and every one of us. And I hope you will receive this message and see that it is a time that you can get up and do something about it because there are possibilities. I am a gardener. I love gardening. I love everything about the fact that everything in this earth is connected to gardening. We all eat, so you are connected to a gardener because the food that you eat was planted in a garden. And that is why gardening is very dear to my heart. And one other look at gardening, we see that gardening is very much dependent on weather, whether we have the right temperature, the right wind, the right amount of water, the rain, and the sun. The garden depends on all this. That is why, for those people who live in the temperate regions, where we have a season where it gets cold and a season when it is warm, we find that a lot of people will go out gardening during the summer because that is the time that you think it's most possible to be able to do your, thank you for that, to be able to do your gardening successfully. And then in the winter, would want to take a look and have a bit of a rest and plan for the following year. For those people who live in regions that is called the tropical regions, they do not necessarily have a period where it is very cold as we see in winter, but they also have seasons for their crops. And when you see this, we know that the time of year has been perfectly gauged as a result. We all get a chance to eat as it's been proposed to us. And this food has been grown by gardeners. That is why I want to talk about gardeners today. Thank you very much for coming along with me because over in most countries, we are going towards the winter. And so our planting season is coming to an end and our planning season is started. This is the time we plan for the year to come. 2020 winter has started and we need to plan for the things we are going to grow in 2021. To start this, we'd have to consider our location. We'd have to consider how the sun shines in our place. Because almost every plant would need the sun to survive. There are some plants that can grow in shade, but they wouldn't be comfortable in complete darkness. and it's the sun that brings even the light that is enough for shade loving plants to actually be able to survive. So, when you want to start and be a gardener against next year, we start planning ahead. We'd have to consider what plants do we want to grow. You may want to grow food crops. This could be vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, spinach, kale, strawberries. Also, you may want to grow trees. When we are growing trees, it will probably take a longer time before the tree comes to maturity and we start to enjoy the fruits of the tree. But this does not mean we should not grow the trees. We should still grow the trees and note how long it's going to take before we can actually start harvesting from it. Now, one thing that I see is we should try to follow best gardening practice by don't just dabble into gardening because you're going to waste a lot of energy and then you have now planted so many things you don't understand any of them and what they require. It will start growing and you think you have, oh, what a beautiful garden. But at some point, when you are supposed to carry on having this beautiful garden, you see that your garden may not be able to get to maturity because there's a few things missing. If the garden needs support, for example, or if you haven't been watering your plants. Also, if you've located a plant that needs a lot of sunlight in the shade, these are all simple things that we need to know about when we want to start a garden. One thing that I would like to advise against is having somebody start a garden very large and everything looks like easy peasy. But when the sun comes along and these plants react to the sun by growing very big, it becomes too much work to maintain the garden. So if there's just two of you and you started this garden, the work will be too much and you would end up being disgruntled and not liking to be gardeners anymore. You will just say, oh, it's just a waste of energy. I met someone on Facebook the other day who said he had spent over £500 to set up his garden and he got nothing out of it. And I said, I think the fact that you spent so much money means you must have planted a lot of things. And he said, yes. So we don't start a garden by planting a lot of things. We start a garden by planting a few things and watching it, trying to learn from others, because that is it. It's a knowledge that you need to gain from someone else or from the plant. But if you want to gain the knowledge from the plant, you have to be able to concentrate on a few plants. If you have several plants, you can't really concentrate on them. You can't tell whether this one is producing a new leaf or if this one is flowering. So you become confused. So my advice is when we want to start gardening, we start it small. Start with a few number of plants, and we keep an eye out for what is happening to these plants. Don't be too far from your garden. If you're a new gardener, you've never had a garden at all before, then you can't go and start in an allotment that is 3 kilometers away and say, I would only go there twice a week. As a new gardener, you need to be able to see your plant every day so that you can understand what is going on. Because the garden is a teacher. The garden will show you how long it takes from putting the seed in the soil to having it coming out of the soil, and then from there to, oh, this plant is looking a bit sturdy now. And from there, the plant starts to flower. And when a plant flowers, it's about to start producing fruits. That is if it's a plant that you have planted for its fruit. You need to be close to your garden if you're just starting gardening. The next thing I'm going to say is when we start a garden, we need to identify each plant that we want, not by name, but we want to identify, am I growing this plant for its leaves? Or am I growing this plant for its flowers? Am I growing this plant for its fruits? If you are growing a plant for its leaves, then you place it, the leaves grow, and you can actually now harvest when the leaves are big enough. You don't have to wait for it to flower, because even if it flowers, then it's already too old. So you place your plant and you are only depending on, I want to harvest the leaves. These are the ones we call leafy green vegetables. The leafy green vegetables are good for our diet. But I'm now going to talk about when you're planting for the flower. When you're planting for the flower, you'd see at a point the plant is now mature and it starts to grow some flowers. You sort of see the buds, buds. You see the buds, and then they will open up and you have the flowers. You may be growing these flowers for their beauty, maybe dahlias, zinnias, roses, geraniums. There are so many plants we grow for their flowers. Cosmos, in fact, there's a myriad of plants, honeysuckle, that we grow for their flowers. That means that plant has already got to the stage that you want. And you keep in mind, I'm growing this plant for its flowers. Now we grow two different types of flowers. Some flowers are very colorful. Some flowers are just colorful and they also have a nice scent, like the popular lavender. It has a nice scent. Roses have a nice scent. Sweet peas have a nice scent. And honeysuckle, they are all grown because they give a nice scent to the environment. And you may just be growing these plants because you want to be harvesting the flowers for sale. That is what is called a flower gardener. So at this stage, you'd have to know the type of plants that you will be growing, and you get them to the flower stage. You also have to learn at what point you should harvest them and package them for sale. Now, finally, we can have gardening where what we aim for is the fruits. It means our plants will grow, will have leaves, will have flowers, and then there will be pollination. For a flower to grow into a fruit, that flower has to be pollinated. I'll give you an example with the tomato plant. If you grow a tomato plant, you see the leaves and soon you see the flowers. And then the bees come along and they pollinate. Hello, Mr. Depufro, thank you for coming. The bees come along and they pollinate the flowers. We say pollination has taken place. That is transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. As gardeners, we can also help this along. Uncle Al, thank you, Uncle Al. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming. How's your day been? So, we have the pollination. One more thing that you can do, apart from the bees, as a gardener, you can shake your plants because these plants, it just needs the pollen grain to fall into place. So if you shake the tomato plant, the pollen grain scatters and falls onto the stigma. Now, one thing is, yeah, you've been busy today. Yeah, it's a Saturday. I mean, getting ready for Christmas. Now, one more thing is after these plants have their flowers pollinated, there has to be a certain range of temperature. Usually, this range of temperature, we usually hit it around summer. And this is why a lot of fruits are grown in summer or indoors. Because that's when the temperature is what is very convenient for the pollinated flower to become fertilized. So I'm now talking about two different processes that would happen before our flower will become a fruit. Our flower will become a fruit when the pollen grain goes from the anther to the stigma, and then it has to become fertilized. If the temperature is too high, for example, if we have a heat wave, then successful pollination but fertilization may not be successful. So the flower will not fall off, but the fruit will be very tiny, almost non-existent. We go along and the ones that have been properly fertilized will grow big, and after a period of time, they will ripen. Thank you very much, Uncle Hal. What have you been busy doing today? Let's say hello to Uncle Hal. Have you put your changing the soils for your plants? That's what one thing I did as well this morning, because I want to use my tomato bed to plant my garlic, so that when my garlic starts to grow from now, you know, and I'm ready to put the tomato in April, I will just intercrop them together. So I'm also changing the soils right now. I did some of it in the morning. Thank you very much for coming, Mr. Steve. What have you been doing today? Any gardening activities or any other activities today? Okay, yeah. And that's another very great point that I would like to consider. Raised beds and pots you can keep for a very long time because they are so convenient and very accessible. It saves you a lot of back pain and things. That is why I also like raised beds and pots. Okay, I can see not at all. Yeah. So in my raised beds, I will be planting chives in place of the tomatoes. I'll plant chives and I'll plant onions. The onions are already in small pots. So I will now put them outside. Yeah, the weather is actually not too conducive today. That's why we can't do a lot of things outdoors. Okay, we'll soon have good weather. So what we will do is I'll be using the soil in my tomato bed. I mean, I will be using that actual place to grow my chives. And that's what I will be showing in one of my videos soon. I will plant onions as well because I want to do a small video on. Okay, yeah, thank you. I will try seaweed and chicken manures. They, yeah, I always use seaweed, but then I will have to now look forward to chicken manures. Okay, I would try and get the chicken manures from the shops. I know a friend who has a shop that sells manures. She works in a shop that sells manures. So yes, yes, it has to be aged, not just fresh ones. These ones have been packed and they are in the it's a big shop. I know somebody who works there, so she should just bring it along for me, so we can get to stay home and not go all the way to the shops because she goes there all the time and she lives in the neighborhood. So I'll just ask for the chicken manures. She does some of my shopping. Thank you very much, Uncle Al. So we need to grow onions, or we are able to grow onions into. Yes, everybody has been saying it that we need manure for good size of the chives and the onions as well. Okay. And also, how about the garlic? I think I can grow all three of them together. Yeah. So what I would do is use seeds which are very tiny and also use starts. I have those already in a pack so that the tiny seeds I actually want to show how they grow and become a little bigger and become onion stacks so that I'll be able to grow them in the next season. That's what I'm trying to do with Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Uncle Al. Yes, thank you very much. Those ones, yes, I haven't seen them because I've grown some onions in this past year, and well, maybe I've just been getting lucky. I haven't seen the wire onion maggots. The only thing that I have seen trying to attack my onions are slugs and other bugs. So what I do is I go out and try to trap the slugs and take them away from my garden. And this works really well for me because I don't want to use pesticides or slug killers in my garden bed. The slugs can stay in other parts but not inside my garden bed. Okay, yes, they will do that. So when we want to grow onions, we would have to have our soil prepared. Because I've grown tomatoes in my soil in the past year, the soil is still there, it's fertile. I will just have to add more compost to it to enable. Oh, yeah, I used beer. That is exactly what I use for the slugs. I use, it's not actually beer. I make the alcohol from rice water, and that's what I use, and it attracts the slugs. I use it in my kale vegetable bed and my strawberry bed. I ferment the rice water and I put it in a trap for the slugs. That's how I get rid of the slugs from my garden. That's how I get rid of the slugs from my garden. Because if we try using chemicals to get rid of slugs, other soft bodied organisms, most especially the earthworms, will be affected. So that is why I just like to say, let's just trap the slugs and the other organisms can stay alive. And also, this is one thing we are trying to avoid because in the supermarkets, they may have lots and lots of chemicals on the food that they sell because they need to produce a lot. They're under a lot of constraints to produce a lot of food for a lot of people. This is why a lot more of us, I'm saying lots, 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 so many sides. This is why many more people should start growing a few things. You don't have to grow every single thing that's going to be on your diet plate, but if you all grow a few things, then the shops will be more relaxed. They wouldn't have to produce so much. Because I was reading yesterday, and strawberries and spinach, they're topping the list of the dirty dozen among vegetables and fruits that we eat. And I'm thinking, it's not that difficult to grow strawberries, because I grow strawberries every year, and you just have to keep the slugs out and make sure you fertilize your soil very well with amendments. And your strawberries will grow well, and you feel happy because you know you haven't got a lot of fertilizers and pesticides in it. Leaf mold is a very good idea. I collect the leaves from the trees, and I mean from under the trees, not from the top of the trees. And I just keep them, and within 6 months, I can be using them to mulch my plants. I use bone meal all the time. Yeah, I use bone meal to revitalize the soil. I use bone meal. I use a fish guts, fish head, and make the soil entirely fertile. And these plants eat everything that we eat as well. So all the leftover that we have, except meat, we can just bury it in certain portions, and the earthworms will multiply. The earthworms will multiply, and they produce a lot of earthworm poop for your garden. Epsom salts come in handy, and they are the ones that provide magnesium to enable fruits to ripen well. They also help the leaves to grow strong. When you have good, strong leaves on your plants, this helps with the photosynthesis, and the plants grow strong. A plant that is growing strong will definitely produce good flowers, and the good flowers will produce good fruits. Make sure you follow this good gardening practice of buying seeds that are meant for growing. You can only grow the seeds of a tomato if you had bought the seeds initially, and then this tomato has grown, and you now take it from your garden or from a friend's garden. Not that you buy a tomato from the market. You can take that tomato, and then you can grow the seed. Because if you buy the tomatoes from the shops, the seed may not be able to produce as much as if it was just a good seed that's meant for planting. It will grow, but the yield will not be very high. The seeds that are meant for planting have already been treated and prepared for planting. The only other way in which we can overcome this are there are some plants you can just grow them, and what you will have to do is you grow a lot. If you want to grow tomatoes and you're not buying your seeds from the market, but you want to grow the fruit that you've bought, you'd have to grow a lot of tomato plants, so that even if they don't produce a lot on each one, the fact that you have a lot of tomato plants, you will now end up with a lot of tomato fruits, and that will be very good. But it's just always great to get a seed that's prepared for planting. Yes, because the country may have a seed shortage. Everybody should be saving their seeds. I've heard of that as well, that there may be a seed shortage. This is because many more people who haven't been gardening are now going to gardening and finding it rewarding, because gardening is actually a pastime, an activity, a business, a science, that's a therapy that one can do, and you find out that it's really rewarding. Whether you have it as a business, it's rewarding. You have it as a hobby, it's rewarding. You have it as a therapy is rewarding as well. Just to be out there in the garden, spotting about, it's good for the mind, it's good for the body, and you get food as well from it. And if you're producing flowers, you see these beautiful flowers and you know you're helping to feed the bees. The bees come along and they go away and produce honey. The bees are actually one group of organisms that do a lot for our plants, and they don't lay eggs to ruin the plant. Because if you see the butterfly, if you had to compare the butterfly and the bee, the butterfly will come along, would help to make your garden pollinated, but it's going to be laying eggs. And these eggs are going to eat up your vegetables. I have videos of butterflies flying around in my garden, and at the end of the day, they ate up my kale. So this is part of the planning that I forgot to do for that particular kale, kale patch. And I've learned my lesson now. Because I learned that you need to cover leafy vegetables with a net hoop, to prevent butterflies from flying over them, laying their eggs, and ruining your work. Because if you're thinking I'm going to be harvesting very soon, and the butterflies have laid their eggs on your. Thank you very much, Uncle Al. Bye. Okay. Pray for us at church. So, these are part of all the things that we need to do as so planning and knowing what part of your plant that you want will help you to know what you need to prepare. Because in the case of the kale, we need the leaves. We want them to not be bitten by slugs, not be bitten by butterfly larvae. So we ensure that they are covered by the net so that we can still get air. Air can pass through net, but butterflies cannot fly through it. Now, green leafy vegetables do not need bees because they do not need pollination. They don't have to develop flowers for you. You are going to be harvesting them at the leaf stage. So when you cover your green leafy vegetables, it doesn't affect your production level. It just ensures that your leaves are safe and not eaten up. When you are growing plants that are going to produce fruit, those ones need to be exposed to air so that the stem can be strengthened and be tough, so that when the flowers develop into fruits, it becomes a part of the plant and it's not readily broken off until the gardener wants to take it. Now, one way of ensuring that our plants grow strong is to stake it. You put a stake in the ground and tie your plants to it, so that when the leaves are moving about and the stem are moving about, it's not moving too vigorously. It's just a bit, enough to make the plants become tough, but not enough to actually break it. It's like being trained to withstand toughness, being trained to withstand tough situations, so that when you now have fruits on it, it doesn't collapse because it's strong enough to bear the fruits along with the support that you put in place. As gardeners, we have to put one thing in mind, and that is we don't just plant our garden and wait for the rain. We plant our garden and we also have to water it, because the rain may come too much at some point, or the rain may come too little. So you are the one who's going to schedule how you want to water your plants. If you want to be watering with a hose pipe, a watering can, or you want to have an inbuilt watering system, but you won't be doing this at the beginning of your becoming a gardener. You're going to have to first of all start with maybe using a hose pipe. And then after the first year, if you feel you like gardening and you want to garden again the following year, then you can do an inbuilt watering system for your garden. One thing we have to note is that when you put water in the soil, the water has to be able to go out so that it doesn't become drenched. Because in soil, we have some microorganisms and they need oxygen. We have earthworms and they need oxygen. And as well, the roots of the plants need oxygen to breathe. So when we plant, we want to ensure that our containers, our pots, our beds have drainage holes. When you buy containers, they may not have holes yet. You'd have to carefully make the holes yourself. Or if you are using some container from your house, you'd have to make holes for the plants. Finally, we'd need to consider the type of soil that each plant needs. Most plants that I know need very fertile soil. Tomatoes need very fertile soil. Peppers need very fertile soil. Green leafy vegetables, most of the time, need very fertile soil. Strawberries need very fertile soil. So that group goes together. If all your soil is very fertile, you can be growing all those kind of things and it will be a successful garden. Also, a lot of flowers need very fertile soil. But then when you now consider something like the carrots, carrots do not want very fertile soil. When you grow carrots in very fertile soil, it's as if you're sending a message out and the ants come along and they bring some aphids and the aphids grow very well, feeding off your carrot roots. And you know, in the case of the carrots, we are growing the carrots for the roots and sometimes the grains as well. So you can be cutting your carrots grains, those are the leaves, to use, and you can also be waiting for the roots in. It's not the same plant that you're cutting the leaves that you're going to be expecting to be collecting roots from. Because if you've been cutting the leaves, the roots will not be feeling too well. So you want to maybe choose some plants. I'll be cutting the leaves of this one, and then those ones you leave them alone. You let them grow their roots very well, so that you'll be able to harvest a very good crop of carrots. What I'm just trying to say is that the soil that we're going to use for carrots should not be too fertile. I made a test of this with a few carrots that I grew, and I saw that this was actually true. And the entire bed under the carrots was full of aphids. And that's I was expecting that that sort of thing might happen. So I actually did it with a carrot that I had eaten, and I took a little piece off the top of the carrot, and that's the one that I planted. So I just wanted to know what would happen if I plant carrots in fertile soil. If it's actually going to happen that there will be a lot of aphids, and truly, there was a lot of aphids in it. So when you want to grow carrots, you don't use too fertile soil. You have to use soil that is a bit sandy, and then you put the fertile soil at the very base of your pot. When you put the fertile soil at the base of your pot, then the carrot's roots are going downwards, trying to reach for the fertile real area, and you can get straight carrots. If the soil is too fertile, it can be branching all over, and that's when you get all those carrots that have all these different shapes, and they are not um, very well formed. They come out with funny shapes, and you can say, "Oh, see this shape of my carrots," and it's actually something interesting that you come up with when you growing with soil that is too fertile. Thank you very much for being here. And if you have any questions on what else you would want me to mention on when we want to start a garden, you can please put it in and I'll talk about that. As we are running into our 1 full hour, I hope you have gained some understanding of how to start a garden with this video and how to forge ahead with the current situation of the planet. Because we just have to keep going. We have to keep hoping. We have to keep expecting that we would have the grace. Because nature, as God has put it together, will always provide for us. It will be very good for everyone to be able to go forward, obtain a very little container, some soil, and then consider planting one thing towards 2021. If you're trying to plant onions, you would have to plant it about now because we need the onion to be in the ground to get very cold in the ground. It needs to be in the ground and it needs to get very cold. That is what actually makes the onions to grow well. You can also grow garlic. You need to grow it now as well. So those are the two things I'm going to put in my garden bed tomorrow. Garlic and onion. and I will leave the spaces for the tomatoes so that next year, when it's time to grow the tomatoes, there will be spaces in between the garlic and onion, and I can just plant my tomatoes in there. That is how I'm planning to go ahead with my garden next year. I'm going to maximize productivity on the soil. And what happens is the garlic and onion will mature maybe about just about a month after I put the tomatoes in. So they're not going to be in there together for a long time. It's just going to overlap for a short period. For gardening, I can say you will not be disappointed. You would actually find a lot of things that you will discover when you start gardening. When I started gardening and I was further into gardening, I started to see. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you so much for coming along. Thanks so much for coming along. Appreciate you. That's the Little Farmers Farm. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm talking that I'm going to be planting my onions and my. Oh, thank you very much, Tony. Sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm going to be planting my onions and garlic in my tomato bed so that by the time I'm ready to plant my tomatoes next year, there will be spaces for the tomatoes, and the time for me to harvest the onion and garlic will be quite close. So I can just harvest those, and the tomatoes can carry on growing into their own season. And I think that would be a good way for me to maximize my gardening space because I have a very little garden. So I have to always try to learn by what I see as these things actually start when the space is empty, and I will have to harvest it when the space is only just being used briefly. So it's actually a good idea for me to try to grow the onions in the bed that I grow my tomatoes in. That's what I'm planning to do tomorrow. And as well, because we are in the cold months now, I will try to plant my kale and spinach. I don't expect or I don't know too well if the spinach will work well, but I will plant the kale because I've realized that the kale will grow very well right now. I'm going to plant it indoors. I've already got it planted indoors. And then when it's big enough, I would put it out there before the butterflies come back. Because that's what happens when I plant my kale at the beginning of spring. It grows well and then it goes into summer and the butterflies come. Even late spring, the butterflies come and they start to eat the kale. So this is why I want to plant my kale now to give it a bigger chance of success. Thank you very much. Yes, Thank you very much. The tomatoes, I had to learn a lot from all of you on YouTube, and it's helped me a lot with having my tomatoes very well done. And that's what I've been telling uh, people here, that we have to have the patience, watch a few YouTubers, read a few books, and learn about how to plant these crops so that we will be planting them in a way that will be bringing us a lot of profit, that is bringing us a very high yield. Because we don't want to plant your tomatoes in a way that all you're going to get off your plant is two fruits. It's not going to make you too happy. Um, Thank you very much. Welcome, Angelas. Thank you very much for coming. I'm planning to plant for next year less cherry tomatoes, because this year I planned that I would plant a lot of cherry tomatoes and I really liked them, but I missed having a lot of big tomatoes. I really, really like the big tomatoes. So I only had about 50% cherry tomatoes, 50% big tomatoes this year. But next year, I'm going to have about 20% cherry tomatoes and 80% large tomatoes, because I found it more interesting growing the large tomatoes than the little one. Thank you very much. Greetings to Danny. I hope Danny is going to be growing some large tomatoes next year as well. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Hey, I will be doing the Sun Gold next year. I didn't do the Sun Gold this year because I had done Sun Gold in a row for about 5 years. And I also did Ajoitka, which is also yellow, but it's large yellow. And I just said, let me take a break this year. If one comes along as I will let it do. But I didn't even get anyone coming along. Oh, yes, I will grow the money makers. Those are my favorites. Money makers, Charlie, beef steaks are my favorites because they grow neat and strong and they are very good. They are very good plants. They are also very disease resistant. That's one reason why I like money makers. I don't know the Costaluto, but I've heard of it. I've heard of the Costaluto. I've heard the name before, but I have not grown it. I have not grown it. I may have to just be on the lookout for it. Yeah, it would be nice to be on the lookout for new varieties of tomatoes, because growing tomatoes is quite rewarding. The way they grow fruit, you will be, if you grown just one tomato plant, just one, you will be happy because there will be a whole lot of fruits. And that's why I always advise, don't just grow any tomato seed. Try to buy a tomato seed, and then you can now start growing the seeds of your tomato over the years. Because if you buy a tomato from the supermarket, it may not grow too good. Okay. Okay. Yes, I like those yellow pear tomatoes. I'm actually looking forward. I would probably grow those instead of sun gold. Yes, the yellow pear tomatoes. Yes, I would look for the seeds. I always had it in mind and then I would forget. I would look for the seeds of the yellow pear and put it in my list for next year because it's always so nice when I see it. I saw it in your I saw somebody I saw him harvesting it and it looked really, really rich. Yeah, yeah. Homegrown tomatoes taste the best. When you eat it fresh, it's it just the skin is not tough because you allow it to ripen and then you eat it. The one that's coming from the shops, they have to harvest it while it's still blushing and package it so that by the time it gets to the shop, by the time you are buying it, it will become ripe. So it's not been allowed to ripen on the plants. It's just been allowed to get to a point and taken off. The one you grow in your own home garden will receive a lot more sun and it will be extra juicy and sweet and very fresh as well. You would see that it is very, very, very fresh. Thank you very much. Yes, I actually went for trying to grow a lot because I had very little space and I wanted to maximize it. Thank you very much, Angela's Busy Bees. I really, really did all the different things that was taught that these are the things you should do when you're trying to get a very high yield of tomatoes. And I was lucky to get very good lines from the shop. That is very good varieties from the shops. They they were really great. And even the money maker, I would often find some money maker coming back as volunteers in the following years. The money maker will come again from seeds, not from the old roots, from some seeds that are falling into the garden bed. I will just see a money maker and it's growing right there. Money maker is a very, very good variety of tomato. Maybe it's the one that is called mortgage lifter in the USA, but it actually does produce so much fruit that you could actually call it mortgage lifter, really. Thank you very much, Mayor. Welcome. Thank you. Please me to hit the like button as you come along. And I'm talking today about all the things that we'll do just to forge ahead as 2020 has been a year that's got a lot of clouds. But these clouds surely must have silver linings. Oh yes, I grow both determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. And on my channel, I have one in which I compared both of them, in which I said um, I made a sucker mistake, because when you are growing a determinate tomato, you want to leave the suckers on, because they're all going to develop at the same time. So you want to leave the suckers on. But if you are growing an indeterminate tomatoes, you don't want too many suckers. If not, your gardening pot or bed or the area you're gardening in will just be branching all over the place, and it will no longer be easy for you to support them. Because you're going to have to put in sticks and you can cage them, which means you will not be able to have access, and air may not flow freely if you have too many suckers that you are allowing to grow on your indeterminate tomato. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. So if you have a lot of determinate tomatoes, they will all come in at about the same time. That's all the fruits on it will come in about the same time. But if you have indeterminate tomato, they go on throughout the season. One way in which we can deal with the determinate tomato is to plant another set for later, so that if the first set has produced the fruits and they've gone, before that has happened, you have already grown um, a stagger set, maybe a month after the first set, so that as these ones are ripening and going, those ones are just getting to maturity, and they will soon start ripening and growing into what you can harvest. It's not all the time that you may want to leave your tomatoes to ripen outdoors. The tomatoes that you may pick would be if your tomatoes have ripened, because I've experienced this a lot in the past, and you have about 3 or 4 at the base that are not yet ripe. If the season is already getting late, I think it's advisable to just snip off the entire tomato bunch, and those little few ones at the end will ripen indoors. Because when you harvest your tomatoes, it will allow the next branch, the next bunch of tomatoes up to start gaining the energy, because you've relieved it. You've relieved the plant, and the the ones that are coming later will start receiving all the energy from the plant if you try to harvest your tomatoes regularly. Because leaving them there, they will still be using the energy, and you may find that at the end of the season, when you get to the end of September and it starts getting cold, you have a lot of tomatoes that are still green. And when it gets cold and you bring in your green tomatoes, it's not easy for them to ripen. If you bring in your green tomatoes when it's still warm, they ripen indoors easily. If you bring them in when the weather is already cold, it's not very easy for them to ripen because they've already been in the cold. One important amendment that we have about gardening is to use the fish guts, or if you have a whole fish, that I have a friend who had a fisherman as a neighbor, and the fisherman gave her a fish, and we said put it under your, she had roses, She puts it under her roses. So I said, okay, I'll put this under my own tomatoes. So when you put tomatoes under your plant, it really does help the soil. This has been practiced for thousands of years by the natives who have been growing things in the past. And it enables the soil to create a mycorrhiza. That is a kind of a relationship that allows the microbes in the soil to live this very lucrative and successful life, and this they will pass on to the earthworms. So the earthworms produce a lot of good worm poop, and the plants will grow much more nutritious, because you know the body of the fish contains more elements than we need in our tomato plant. So it's a complete fertilizer for the tomato plant, the body of the fish. It contains so many elements. It contains the macronutrients that we call the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, and it contains the micronutrients. That's the nutrients that we just need a little bit of. It also contains those ones. So you find that using the fish under your plant or buying fish emulsion from the shop works really well for tomato plants. Works very, very well for roses as well. Okay. Yeah, for cabbages as well. That is good because I'm actually trying to create a space for my cabbages and lettuce that will be closer to my house so that I can be able to see them every day. And also broccoli. Yeah, and broccoli. I have some broccoli started, and yes, I'm very happy. We'll also be able to use fish heads and skeletons, and you get it for free in the market. You go to the market, you do your shopping, and you ask the shop owner, "Can I have some fish heads?" They pack it in a bag for you, and you take it home. Sometimes you may have had to tell them that, I mean, they know that you collect it. So when you go, they'll say, okay, you come back on a certain day. They will be throwing it into a nylon bag, and then they just give it to you, and you take it home and put it in your soil. Just make sure you bury it deeper than 12 feet. And on the day you bury it, use a kind of cage on top of the soil so that squirrels, cats, anything that likes to come and start digging in soil, because yeah, you may still have a bit of drops of water from the fish on the surface. So they will be able to trace it. But once they get there and there's a cage in the way, then they will not be able to reach the fish that you put in the soil. Once this has been in place for about a week, they can't access the fish anymore because it's already starting to break down, and it's fertilizing your plants very, very well, and you get a very good harvest. All these things we can actually readily produce from the wastes of our own food at home. Okay, yes, the lime with lime. Okay, yeah, to smother the smell. That is good. That is good. Thank you very much. Yes. Um, the set of the brassicas. I've grown kale and mustard. I really like mustard, so I've grown kale and I've grown mustard as well, and they turned out really, really nicely for me, and I really enjoyed it. It's actually a great um, experience, gardening, because it allows you to stay out there, receive the sun, and you see other gardeners. I mean, I've got so many friends for the fact that I'm just gardening, because and you have something to talk about. You talk about these are the different ways you can do this. You can also add some other thing, and we all just learn from each other. So I say gardening opens up possibilities. It opens up businesses, and it opens up market. It's something that has been done for generations. But then I think in recent times, it was like let the companies do it, let the corporations do it, and a lot of people started turning their backs to gardening. But it's good that nowadays a lot more people are paying more attention, and we are going back to the soil. We're trying to grow our food. We're trying to grow our flowers. I enjoy growing zinnias, dahlias, because they produce beautifully. And I also enjoy growing nerines. It's always wonderful because when you grow just one or two bulbs in 2 or 3 years, you have a lot. That's the thing that is very wonderful that I find about growing those bulb plants. I also have iris, and they've multiplied so much. I've given away a lot of them, and they still come back and they make the whole place so beautiful. It's good to be a vegetable gardener because you get food. It's good to be a flower gardener because you get beautiful flowers in your garden. And apart from that, I'm also an indoor gardener because I like foliage plants. I have a few foliage plants of my own. I think you can see them on the side. Some of them are trying to stick their faces out here. You can see a part of my syngonium. You can see a part of my uh, lucky bamboo and the pothos. I'll be showing some of these more appropriately, some other videos that I do. But I didn't want to inundate you with so many plants on my first video. That's why I've just turned the video to this direction, and then I'll be showing you whichever plant I wish to show, and we'll concentrate on that specific one. Thank you very much, Tony. I'm very, very appreciative. So, what I find out is that when we take a look at gardening, it's got different. forms to it. So one can decide to grow vegetables, you can decide to grow flowers, you can decide to have foliage, because mainly indoor plants are not actually grown for their flowers. I don't use extra lighting too much for my indoor plants. I just put them by my very wide window as companions, not as something I want to grow and let it become too many. Well, it's a lot already. That's why I'm not using too much grow lights on them. But I still have quite a few plants. Because when you see a plant and then you say, oh, yes, I've always wanted to have this plant, and you get it. And before you know it, you have more plants. And I've had plants that I've had to let go because some plants actually take up a lot of space. I used to have the Anthuria, very beautiful. I had a red Anthuria and a pink Anthuria. The flower, but although they are indoor plants, I just had to let go of them because they were going to disturb so many other plants too much. I freeze my tomatoes. And what I do is I boil, I blend it, and then I boil it, and I'll have enough to fill maybe 4 cooking sessions. And I take some directly as whole foods. I pack them in nylon bags. I put them in the freezer. So I have two different forms of frozen tomatoes. There are those that I've already prepared. I've already blended them with onions and chili and boiled them. And when they cool, I freeze them the following day. So I have two ways that I store my tomatoes. I freeze some while they're fresh, like that, whole foods, and then I blend some and cook it and freeze it. So I have two different forms of blended tomato, depending on what I want to use the tomatoes for. And we actually go through a lot of fresh tomatoes as well. And I've not canned tomatoes before. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming along today. I hope to come again and we can have a chat again about what's going on and how we have a silver lining on this dark clouds that seems to be all over the place in this twin year that we are in. there is possibilities. Thank you very much. Oh, hello. Hello, Thomas. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you. Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming, Thomas. And yes, I did not actually mention too much about the worms. In my garden, the main powerhouse are the worms. I have different types of worms. I don't really identify them, but I know there are red wigglers and there are the night crawlers. They don't like to stay in the soil, but they stay around either under the pots. That is why every time I move a pot, I try to collect them and put them back in the pot. Because they're not really interested in staying in the pot. They just want to stay around where we have the leaves and then boreholes in the soil and just play around and aerate the soil. They end up producing fertile soil when they produce their worm poop. And this is one reason why worms are very, very important in gardening. If we are using fertilizers, we would have to buy fertilizers every year. But if we are using worms, these worms would grow, lay eggs, and when the worm dies, the body will fertilize the soil. While the worm was alive and is eating, the poop fertilizes the soil and it's laid eggs that are now going to develop into new worms. So it means you've already got your fertilizer purchased for the following year if you're using worms. If you are using shop bought fertilizers, you'd have to go and buy it every year. Even if you buy 2 years supply, you have to buy it in the third year. For earthworms, they just keep on having more babies and becoming more and more and more. Thank you very much, Thomas. Oh, yes, I make compost of almost everything possible. And also, the leaves go for the leaf mold, and the earthworms love it. I like to concentrate on growing tomatoes because of the escalating price of tomatoes. And I just thought if the prices are escalating and they're putting a lot of pesticides in it, why don't we all try to grow just a few that we are going to eat? Then it will be very, very nice to grow some tomatoes at home. And I started. Yes, yes. The vermicompost, that is what comes from the earthworms. And that really helps all the plants. And I was saying earlier that this is not the case with carrots because carrots don't want a lot of fertile soil. But other things, roses, dahlias, zinnias, cosmos, peppers, green leafy vegetables, they all want fertile soil. So that is actually the very best thing that we can give to our soil, not fertilizers that would allow the the life of the soil to die because the soil has life in it. It has little microorganisms, little insects, little other creepy crawlies that are not even insects. They all live in the soil. So if you are putting fertilizers, you're actually, it's like burning their body. So they get burns and they die. And you see, this means the earthworms will actually not be able to survive. If the earthworms are not able to survive, it means you will have to continue to depend on fertilizers, that is chemical fertilizers. We can use organic fertilizers that are made from seaweed, that are made from manures. The manures are just like the waste products of animals, like cows, horses, pigs, chickens. But in using manures, we have to know the source. Make sure it's not from animals that have been treated with medications, maybe racing horses that need to be treated with medications. We need to make sure that the animals are drug free and that the manure we use is aged. The manure has to be there for about 2, 3 years because in those places where you get horse manure or cow manure, they have a large mound of manure. So you need to collect from the side where it is the oldest. Don't collect fresh manure and use because it burns the garden. You need to collect aged manure. This will mean it's no longer hot and any chemicals or that may actually affect our plants would have gone away. All you will be left with will just be the microorganisms, and even there will be worms, earthworms, that have decided to start living in the manure because I mean the manure would have been placed on the ground anyway. So the area will have a lot of earthworms. They will move in. The manure will have a lot of earthworms in it, and you will just continue to get more and more earthworms for your garden. That is why I cannot say I have only one type of earthworms in my garden. What I do is I just try to collect every earthworm that I see that has strayed out of the gardening bed, that has strayed out of under the pots. I strip them back. I call it earthworm rescue. I strip them back and put them in the garden bed again so that they can stay safe. I don't want them to get dragged away by rain or when I'm washing my garden floor. I don't want them to get washed away. So those earthworms are many, and I can see the stripes of the red wigglers, the red stripes, and I can see that some of them don't have those red stripes. So I know that there are different types of um, worms in the in my garden bed. Oh yes, you have piles over 10 years old. Those are the best manure to use. Piles that have been there for years that you actually know are now safe to use. Mhm. Okay, so the manure is now on a road that's been locked. Ooh. Well, probably they'll open it at some point. Because I'm also looking for a place to obtain manure for next year because I said we're in the planting season for most things is over now. So this is the planning season, and this is the time that we plan what I'm going to plant, how I'm going to put the soil together, where I'm going to place the plants. so that even if I'm a new gardener, I will look out and see which part of my garden receives the most sun, and then that's where I will put certain plants that are going to be fruiting. Plants that are going to be fruiting, plants that are going to be flowering, you need to put them in the sun. Plants that are just green leafy plants, they can stay in a bit of shade. That is a way to arrange the garden for maximum um, output and maximum yield. If you put a plant that's going to be producing fruits, e.g., tomatoes or peppers or strawberries, in the shadier part of your garden, they will not produce too well. You need to put those ones in the sunniest part of the garden and put the green leafy vegetables in the shaded parts of the garden. That is the best way to arrange the garden. My further plan for next year is to grow more trees, because I believe, as I said earlier, that trees will take longer to grow than the annual tomatoes that I'm growing and the green leafy vegetables. But all the same, year in, year out, there will be a time that these trees will mature and they will start fruiting. And what I'm going to do is buy bare root trees, or trees that have already grown a bit from the shops. I bought one bare root cherry tree. I have that in my garden. I have a cherry tree and it was fruiting this year, which was nice. And I also have a tayberry that also took 2 years. It did not fruit in the first year, but this year was its second year, and then it started to fruit, and the wait was actually worth it. So if you want to plant something and it seems like it's going to be 2 years before it starts fruiting, it's still all right, because as the Lord wills, the time will just roll past and the 2 years will be here and you will have your fruits. All you have to do is just maintain them, make sure they don't get blown away by the wind and they don't get eaten up by some pests. In their own time, they will start producing. That is what a garden needs. Just someone to keep an eye on it, a bit of help here and there, and the garden grows. The garden grows while you sleep. The garden grows while you go out. The garden just grows. All you have to do is help it along. Yes, I have grown chilies and I'm overwintering my chilies right now. I've grown habanero, which is a hot chili pepper, and I've also grown the pepperoni seeding, which is also hot. And I've got quite a few plants of them that are trying to overwinter. When I did my overwintering in the past, they didn't all survive. Yeah, okay. Yeah, what happens with the peppers, as I learned, is because the plant is now more mature, it starts to produce hotter chilies because it's got a bigger body now, and you're probably still giving it the same amount of water. When it was smaller and you are watering it, the water wasn't drowning the plant, but it was diluting the pepper. At a later time, the plant will now have bigger roots. When you water it, the water that the roots are getting is not going to be so much. So you'd find the peppers are going to be hotter. Let me write this down. Have less water to share between them. And so they get hotter. Yeah, thank you. That's some explanation I got because I also have experienced that. It's the same plan. If you taste it at the beginning, you will be like, because you want to know if your chili pepper is hot, and you're like, oh, it's not so hot. But then if you now take it at a later date, you are like, yeah, it's hot. That's because the water it's getting, although you're still watering in the same amount, the it's able to allow the plant to get hotter. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something that I've experienced as well. And in fact, we ended up just chomping on the pepper because we had tasted some at the beginning anyway, and it wasn't peppery. And so a month later, harvested some more peppers from the same plant and just took a bite, and it was you had to rush to get some drink to cool the mouth because that really does happen. It's just the strange ways of peppers. It's strange ways of peppers, and it's just so great to be able to overwinter a pepper plant because in the following year, the stem has become so big and sturdy. It's able to support a lot more pepper. So these pepper plants, we shouldn't be growing it every year. We should actually be trying our best to overwinter them so that when they come along the following year, they really be a whole lot of peppers for us to harvest. It's actually good to be able to have your pepper that produced just a little in the first year producing so much for you the following year. And the same with strawberries. When you grow your strawberries in the first year, you just get maybe 4 strawberries per plant, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, that's good enough. And then you overwinter it. It's actually quite easy to overwinter strawberries. Just leave it out there. You may cover the bed, you may not cover the bed. It depends on how cold you think your winter is. If your winter is not too cold, you don't need to cover it. If your winter is cold, you cover the bed, and in the following year, each strawberry will be giving you about 8 to 10 strawberries. They just come along, and you'll be having strawberries every day for the whole month of June. That's what happened with strawberries. And that's what I also started to grow berries as well because they stretched further than June. They stretched till July so that we still had more berries. And I had the advantage that they produced a lot and we were able to just keep freezing them and using them for smoothies. We have all berry smoothies. and we also go for foraging. I will talk about foraging on another day because I like to go blackberry um, hunting. You have a lot of blackberries, wood, shrubs, and you just go there and harvest um, blackberries. And there will be loads because they are just growing in the wild. They grow so well, they grow so big, and they are so tasty. And it's also like a kind of a nice stroll, walk around when you go blackberry picking. Just see everybody standing around picking their own, or you can see the footprints of some people that have come before you to pick, and you know, oh, somebody's been here. And it's just so nice to be able to forage blackberries from the bushes. It's really, really nice. And when you see birds taking the blackberries, you see that they are also getting something from nature that we all enjoy. Although I don't like seeing birds coming along to pick my own berries in in my own garden, but that one that is out there is just there for all of us. Okay, I think yeah, that's exactly what it seems like. Like in the early stage, it seemed as if you were overwatering the the plants. They were actually small. They had a small body, and the amount of water you put on it made the plant to dilute its hotness. Because they said that you should try to let your pepper plants be stressed. Yeah, it's called stress. You allow it to get stressed. I don't like to allow my pepper plants to get stressed either because it makes the plant to remain small. So I would rather have it not hot in its first set of harvest, and the plant will already be big, so that at least in the next set of harvest, the plant is now big, it's now hot, and I'm now trying to overwinter the plant. Yes, exactly. That is the difference between the blackberry that you get in blackberry hunting or blackberry picking. They have little thorns, whereas the blackberries that we grow in our gardens, they've produced the thornless ones, and we just take them freely. They're actually safer for children to. So when we go blackberry hunting, we make sure everybody stays to what they are able to handle because those blackberry um, can really be a pain. The thorns on them. So you just pick it and give to the children in the small bowl. Hello and welcome to the Stick Boy. We are here discussing the hopes and possibilities, although we have a heavy cloud weighing over the year since the beginning of the year, but there's still hope and there's still possibilities. Thank you for coming. Are you a gardener or what do you do? Can you tell us? Okay. Yeah. Young children would not like to battle the thorns because there's so many of them on the blackberry bushes. but it's also just for the experience and the fun, because you're out in the sun and it's summertime, makes it very, very interesting. And it's also nice to let children see that this thing can actually grow out there. And it's good that she's able to see the difference between the ones that are growing just by themselves in the forest and the ones that we are cultivating at home. So when it's growing in the forest, it's got to protect itself. So it's got to have a lot of thorns. But the one we are growing at home, we are protecting very well. So it's, I think that's probably the way we can explain it. Although we all know the ones we are growing at home have been grafted onto each other to make their stems very smooth. It's just to make things more comfortable for us as gardeners. Because when the gardeners are comfortable, everybody else that wants to eat will be comfortable as well. You don't want your gardeners to getting their fingers caught with thorns on a daily basis. So we are going to bring this live stream to an end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Stick Boy. Thank you so very much. So lovely that you came as well. So, okay, okay. And my greetings to your daughter. And I really appreciate about the chilies. That is what happens. Thank you very much for coming. Have a nice evening. Love to your family. I'll be bringing this to a close and I'll see you again tomorrow. Don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you and bye. Goodbye and have a lovely evening. Thank you for being here. Lillian from Princess Lillian's Gardens. Happy gardening, happy YouTubing.